The options were chosen, the votes were cast, and the results are in. The community selected weapon that's featured in this week's 5 games video is what feels like the forgotten exotic scout rifle, Symmetry. It is a weapon that I'm fairly familiar with, but I don't think I've taken it for an honest spin since I covered it back in, September of 2020. So this should be an experience. But we'll give Symmetry a proper PvP weapon breakdown and then see how it holds up in the present day's Crucible. Symmetry is an exotic arc scout rifle firing at 260 rounds per minute with 20 rounds in the magazine, and is one of the nicest looking weapons in the game, in my opinion of course. The weapon stat line, unlike the aesthetics, are The stability's pretty good, the aim assist isn't too shabby, and the recoil direction is perfectly fine sitting at 85. But the range stat is pretty bad. The handling is slow and the reload speed is just one step out of the gutter. The intrinsic trait is Revolution. By default, this weapon fires in full auto, and you can reload swap to the Arc Seeker mode, which fires projectile-based munitions that track toward enemies. This function ties right in with the Dynamic Charge exotic perk. Precision hits build stacks of Dynamic Charge. Then swapping to Arc Seeker mode increases the damage and partially reloads the magazine based on the number of charges. The exotic catalyst increases the number of dynamic charge stacks that you can accumulate, but I have no idea how many charges you can pile up without it. It's been far too long for me. When it is applied though, you can stack up to 20. Functionally, at base, it is very much in line with a rapid fire scout, but awards 1 stack of dynamic charge with every crit landed. But there were times in an actual game where it didn't seem like I was getting credited for every crit. I would guess it's probably just a latency issue, but something to keep your eye on nevertheless. Headshots from Symmetry are showing for 55 points of damage on screen and 29 for body shots. These are rounded up from about 54.4 and 28.15 respectively. That puts the optimal time to kill at a kind of icky 0.93 seconds with a resilience break between tier 4 and tier 3. 4 crits in one body is required on the higher side, 3 and 2 on the lower. For a pure body shot time to kill, you're looking at 9 shots in 1.87 seconds versus tier 8 resilience or higher, or 1.63 seconds with 8 shots versus tier 7 or lower. I did fetch you a suboptimal kill speed as well, which does require just 1 more bullet than the optimal time to kill, but it is a good bit more forgiving, as one would hope. For the weapon's physical range, 4 years after release, there's still something a little wonky going on here. Damage falloff should be occurring past 66 meters, but as you can see here, I'm sitting 89 meters away from the misses, still hitting for full damage. Sometimes, and sometimes not. So yeah. But I'd say for any practical engagements on a Crucible map, the damage falloff from Symmetry should not be much of a factor. For the weapon's reload speed, regardless of the fire mode, I have it clocked in at a pretty lengthy 2.67 seconds. Then when swapping onto or off of the Arc Seeker fire mode, you're gonna have to give the weapon about 0.8 seconds before it's ready to fire. Speaking of which, let's have a look at it. The weapon's fire rate is going to drop to 100 rounds per minute, and it's now firing travel time projectiles that have moderately strong tracking. These cannot score crits, are not affected by damage falloff, and do carry arc blast damage. Once activated, all acquired stacks are locked in and put on a 10-second usage timer, but technically activation and the countdown do not start until the first Arc Seeker is fired. At base, these projectiles will deal 59 points of damage on a direct impact. But with each stack of dynamic charge that you lock in, that's going to increase, and here's how it shakes out. You can see big damage jumps between the lower stack levels with hard diminishing returns as you pile on more and more. Things to note though, at 0 or 1 stack, it is going to take 4 shots to down an enemy Guardian. Once you hit 2x, you will be able to land 3-shot kills in about 1.2 seconds. At 6x though, you can get a potential 2-shot on Guardians running up to tier 7 resilience. 7x, that's 2 shots versus any resilience tier in 0.6 seconds. Just keep in mind that does not account for the travel time of the projectile. Another thing to consider, while it may seem pointless to stack up more than 7x of dynamic charge, that's not entirely true. Remember, these are carrying arc blast damage, meaning there is a blast radius, which will increase with the number of stacks. With a base seeker, no dynamic charge, you're only looking at 2 meters, max. This is going to grow incrementally up to 8 meters at 20x. So that does provide some forgiveness if one of those seekers is off target. It gives you the utility of hitting enemies around corners or behind cover, and can open up the door for some multi-kill potential. So while 7x is typically what you're going to be looking for, going higher than that is not without its benefits. And I did test Symmetry out versus a couple of supers as well, and it fared okay. Versus a well with 10x dynamic charge, you can chip it down. You're probably not going to down to Guardian directly, but you are splashing the spike with the arc blast damage, and eventually it can knock it out, leaving anyone within the well exposed. Not a quick process, but maybe feasible if you can keep your distance. Versus a Ward of Dawn, even at 20x dynamic charge, 10 seconds is not enough time to knock down that bubble. And if you're bold enough to hop in there with them, it's still going to take about 5 shots to down that Titan. Probably not worth the risk in most cases. And I think that should about cover it, so let's hop into those 5 matches. I'm going to be heading in on my Dawnblade with Ophidian Aspect as the exotic armor piece to try to get Symmetry a bit more help with its slow handling and reload speed. For my offhand weapon, I'm going to be taking in my Imperial Decree shotgun to try and stave off any enemy players that get in a little too close for comfort. And as usual, I do have the applicable armor mods stacked on to try to get our featured weapon as much of a boost as possible. Game 1 was on Anomaly, and my initial thought was, oh great, I'm bringing a scout rifle into a close quarters map. All in all though, things went a bit better than I expected. I definitely tried to play a bit outside of the main action, shied away from unfavorable engagements, and tried to capitalize on opportunities when they presented themselves. In other words, shooting enemy guardians that weren't looking at me. The end results were favorable, 20 defeats with Symmetry chipping in on 17 of them, 2.5 efficiency, and the opening match was a win. Match 2 on Altar of Flame I was figuring would be a bit more favorable for Symmetry, and for the most part it was. It's a little more open, you got some longer sight lines, a wider choice of angles to engage from. It gave me plenty of chances to build up dynamic charge stacks and put the Arc Seekers to good use. The win did slip away from us at the very end, but on a personal level, I was pretty happy with my showing. Match 3 was on Multiplex, which should be another favorable map, in theory, but at the same time, it's not a map that I'm overly familiar with. I did my best to try to stick to the longer lanes and sightlines, but my lack of map knowledge sometimes left me not knowing what angle enemies were approaching from. So I did try to stay a bit more passive here, resulting in 18 defeats, 15 assisted by Symmetry, a 2.0 efficiency rating, and another close loss. Match 4, we're back on Altar of Flame, which I was pretty happy about. The first go-round went pretty well. This time, maybe not so much. I basically stuck to the same game plan, harass from a distance, build up charge stacks, but I think our team as a whole was pretty well outclassed. The enemy team was just, they were tough. I wasn't able to move around the map as freely as I would have liked. We got pinned in our spawn a couple times. I was doing my best to break away from bad engagements quite often. As a whole, things just did not go smoothly. I still held on to a 2.0 efficiency rating, making the enemy team work for any kill they secured against me. And even though it was kind of an ugly match, against all odds, it ended up being an ugly win. We got mopped up pretty hard in the kill count department, but the scoreboard told a different tale. Last match of the session was on Wormhaven, another map where I really had to pick my spots. Things get pretty hectic inside around the B flag, so I tried to stay near the central hub, but not exactly in the central hub, which I think was the right call. Enemy movement is usually pretty predictable here. The map does facilitate kind of a specific flow. Hanging a few steps back and letting things flow to me seemed to work out. 18 defeats, Symmetry showed up for 14 of them, 3.0 efficiency, and we end the session on a win. So 3 wins, 2 losses on the day, an average of 19 defeats across 5 games, while keeping my efficiency rating in a range that I'm quite happy with at 2.36. Regarding Symmetry specifically though, I had a very difficult time collecting my thoughts on this weapon. At its core, it is a 260 RPM scout that's not exceptionally accurate due to the low range stat. And I can't even begin to count the amount of times an enemy just slipped behind cover when I needed one more bullet to down him. And then comes the issue of, where do you use it? It doesn't exactly thrive up close with SMGs and sidearms in the mix. It does have to contend with auto rifles and hand cannons in the mid-range, and it can get bested by high-impact pulses or other scout rifles at longer ranges. Its time to kills and the overall characteristics of a rapid-fire scout just kind of make it seem like it doesn't fit anywhere. So heading into the matches, knowing I just couldn't stand and bang with this gun, I had to approach things a little bit differently. My primary focus was just getting bullets on targets. I figured it'd be best to try to engage from the less used angles of the Crucible maps to try to catch the enemy players off guard. And the moment I got behind in a gunfight, it was time to get the hell out of Dodge. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, as the story usually goes for a mediocre PvP player. But it did accomplish 2 things. 1, even if I didn't secure the kill outright, I was putting damage on enemies, helping my teammates out. And 2, I was able to build up dynamic charge stacks more consistently due to the fact I was dying less often. And I do think dynamic charge in the alt-fire mode is where the real strength of Symmetry lies. Crazy, right? In exotic weapons, exotic functionality is the main selling point. But those Seeker Orbs, even with a moderate amount of stacks built up, they are pretty damn impressive. A potential 2-shot with a 0.6 second time to kill, a fair amount of tracking, a blast radius that can catch secondary targets as well, all music to my ears. and this does allow you to, and kind of asks you to, get a bit more aggressive with the gun. Admittedly, I did get a bit over-aggressive at times, trying to get as much work as possible out of that 10-second timer, but even when things didn't pan out exactly as I planned, I usually ended up taking someone down with me. Overall though, I do really like the play loop that Symmetry provides, and even with its shortcomings in the base fire mode, it did seem to feed into my preferred playstyle pretty well. It does feel like there's an experience-acquired knack to using this thing to its max potential, and it's one that I definitely want to explore further in the future. The guns kinda sparked my imagination. And it might be high time that we actually took another look at this weapon in PvE as well. But that's gonna have to be for another day. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to leave it a like on your way out. And 4 more weapons will be randomly selected for next week's video, poll going up on Friday. But with all that being said, have a great day, Guardians, and I'll catch you on the next one.